Hey, this is Keith from Save the Rust, and today I'm going to go through some of my new old stock parts with you. I got out some of this stuff about a year ago, but some of it I've been collecting heavy for about the last 10 years, and but I've acquired some parts over 25 years ago that I still have today. And when I talk new old stock, I'm talking Harley made this stuff in 1942, and it was never used in or on a motorcycle. So if you see one of my last videos, I opened up a crate of new old stock sprockets that are right here, and those haven't been opened in like 80 years. They are brand new in the package from 1941. So check it out if it interests you. So getting back to this, it's hard to even know where to start with all this because a month ago, I got offered a set of gas and oil tanks, new old stock, NOS. We'll just call that. That's an easy term, and that kind of, got in my brain, and I started figuring out what exactly do I have that's NOS, new old stock. And about a year ago, went up to a couple provinces over up here in Canada, went over to Alberta, Canada by Red Deer, and got a good chunk of new old stock Harley parts, including this frame, including the front fender, including an original Springer, new old stock, never been put together. So this stuff was supposedly out of an old dealer's, stock room that had been there, again, had to be sitting around for 80 years. And with the offer of these gas tanks, I started looking into what do I have. So I got the frame, front end, fender, like I said. And then I started writing it down because there's so much to a bike, kind of where do I have? Well, I have another set of, original set of handlebars. And then I have a motor. And the motor would be, some people are gonna find it's a bit of controversy if it's new old stock or not. In my mind, it is. So when we get to the motor, I'll kind of give you a bit more of a heads up on it, but reality is it was found in a crate back in the 80s. I got it off the guy who found it. In the 90s, he sent it off to a local Harley dealer that I know, and they went through it, preparing it to run again, because at that point, it had been, 50-something years sitting. And the beauty of new old stock parts is that you can use them, but a motor is a little bit different because any condensation that would have got into the motor would have caused some issues like rusting in the barrels, etc. So what the Harley dealer did is he opened it up and he bored it out 10th out over, and then reassembled it, probably changed a couple of gaskets and just kind of went through it from what the previous owner that I got from told me. Then he took that motor and literally put it back on the shelf, and it has never been run. It was never run previous, it was never run after, and in my mind, I'm saying it's new old stock, 10th out over. So I'm not gonna lie to you about it, I'm just gonna tell you, what's gone on with that motor, but I'm gonna treat it as new old stock. And it doesn't have numbers, no serial number on it, because it was sold as Army surplus, post-war. There's a shop here in Winnipeg, actually originated in Winnipeg, Princess Auto. It's big across Canada. And they used to sell these motors, a lot. It's not, I do know of another motor still in the crate, and hopefully he's watching. And I'd love to have that one. But the reality is there was some of these around, and over the last, those were sold in the back of the 60s even. If I remember correctly, you could even buy from Princess Auto complete WLC, Canadian Army Edition for like 185 bucks. So getting back to this, what we're gonna do is we're gonna assemble everything that I have in new old stock onto this chassis. I don't have some major components like the rear fender. I don't have wheels, but this is gonna be really unique. I mean, right now I know of about 5 of these frames, new old stock. Wheels Through Time has one. Then there's one at a shop in the Midwest that I know of. Never seen pictures, I just was told about it from a really good source. There were 2 in neighboring province in Manitoba. It's called Saskatchewan. I've seen pictures of them. I do know who has them. So there's 2 guys that now have them. One guy had 2 of them, sold one to another. And what's wild about those 2 is that they're still in the crate. I'm not kidding. Like, it's wild. Like, the crate isn't, a fully sealed crate like these. It's like bands with wiring, and the frame is actually kind of tilted up, and it's hung in this wooden crate. Love to have one, but I got one that we can use. So I'm lucky enough, I'm fortunate enough that of the 5 I know, this is one we're gonna start putting together. Don't expect this to get finished anytime soon, because for one, parts aren't available. It's not easy to come across new old stock parts and afford them. I've just been lucky enough that this all came in a deal that I bought, and I got it at a very reasonable price. So follow along. I'm gonna go through some of these parts as we kind of assemble it, but first I'm going to identify and show you what years they are, what fitment, etc. Now again, I'm building this out of what we have, what we can find. So not everything's going to be WLA, not everything's going to be WLC. It's going to be a mixture, and you know what? That's the best I can do. I mean, hey, if you can find anyone else doing this, kudos to them, because this is insane. The idea of this is insane. That's why it's been kind of all over my head for the last month. Do I attempt this? Can I attempt this? It's just, it's nuts to think about assembling an 80-year-old brand new Harley out of new parts that were never used in 80 years. Kind of get your head wrapped around that idea. But I have some parts. So we're gonna start assembling this, and again, I'll go through the parts. I'm gonna identify them to you as best as I can on what years and what models they are. Follow along. So here's the frame. So we'll go over it really slowly here. You can just see, the paint isn't perfect. It wouldn't be after getting kind of bounced around for the last 80 years. Being in a storage, we call it shelfware, where it's been on a shelf, moved around, kind of rubbed up against, etc. But one of the things that you're going to look at is, you see the motor mounts, they're perfect. There's been no motor sat in there ever. One of the things you would do is you would take the paint off, and so when the motor sits flat, it actually sits flat on there. So when you're trying to identify a frame, one of the first things you're going to do is you need to buy these kind of books. Bruce Palmer does an incredible job of dissecting all these frames, and you need your spare parts manual, because they'll tell you some great information. So first off, what you're going to look at is you're going to see this number here, ZE35T, and there's a 9 next to it. And there's an emblem here, and there's 2 different forging companies. I don't have that offhand, but all this information's in those books. And the number 9 here would indicate 1943. So one of the first things you're going to do is when you're looking at a 45 frame, if you want to determine years, one of the first things that's very easy to point out is, you see this mount here? This is a 3rd transmission mount. They came out in 1941. Prior to that, it only had 2 bolts. So the bolts only went through here. This is the 3rd one. So that came out in 41. Another thing that's easy to look at is this is a 2-hole clutch mount, and that was from 41 to 46. In 47, it went to a 3-bolt. And then I think in 48, they had there was 2 mounts here and here for a coil. Prior to that, it was held on by a clamp. Another thing is this casting mount. This is from a very early 45s where they had a bar go through it. And they haven't used this since like 1934 or something like that. But this boss is not there in 50 to 52. So in the last couple of years of the Harley 45 frame. Harley 45 frames singles stopped in 1952. And but the front section here was the front section was still the same right up till 73 on the Survey car. One of the other things that you look at is on the front lug here, you see how it's welded? That's 1943 and later. This is an earlier frame, 42 and earlier. See how there's only a tack weld here and nothing welded here? Because it's brazed. And this is the later frames. This is a 3-bolt hole for a clutch. And then this is the mounts for the coil. So this is 47 and later, and I believe this is 48 and later. So here we have the front springer. Again, new old stock. You see a little bit of grease on the stem. It's because I had it just sitting in that frame for the last year. So let's go over this front end right now. And one of the first things you're going to notice is it's got big twin rockers. So what does that mean? Is that this is a 42 WLC and later, because it uses the same brake as a knucklehead or a big inch flathead. The WLAs had different rockers, which I'll show you right away. And they position the rockers on the inside, not the outside, like these ones are. One of the other things that makes this a WLC, you see these mounts, it's for the ride control. So that's a series of steel bands that go here with pucks that kind of slows it down. It's a ride control. So a WLA would never have these, WLCs only. All right. And then the stem, it's the center one right here. That is a 7/8, not 1 inch. So that makes it 45. You see how they're in line? Those the 2 legs and then the stem. If you ever wondered what an inline and an offset is, this is inline. The offset, the stem would be offset from the other 2. Okay. Beautiful shape. Again, look at the top of the top here. No paint has ever been flaked off. No bolt has ever gone through. New, old stock. 80 plus years old. 82, 83. I mean, we're going into 2025, so we'll call that 83 years old. It's unbelievable that it exists. Pretty happy I got it too. I'm a parts nerd, if you haven't heard that term yet. I love old parts, especially these original pieces. It's just so cool that this stuff exists, you know, 80 something years later. So if you're ever trying to identify a Springer, there are multiple items that you can look for. You know, like I pointed out, the rockers. That's very easy to understand what those are. On the there's a number on the front leg right here. You see all this? This is a number 11. In those books I was showing you earlier, they have a reference guide, and number 11 is 1943. Some of the other numbers, you know, like a, you know, let's say 9, 10, that could be 42 or 43. Number 11 is strictly 43. There are differences also on, if you're looking up at this angle to the bottom of this, there's 4 different versions of that, of these front legs. They're notched, they're wide, they're narrow, and that all depends on years and everything. Again, get the Palmer books if you really want to get into this, because it is the insane amount of details that go into this on a Springer. You can see how this one has the grease zerks on the outside, but the bosses are still there. This is, you know, early Springers had the bosses on the inside, which are really hard to, you know, grease, because the headlight would have been all in here and the horn. So they moved on to the outside. I believe that was late 30s. Don't quote me on that one. But yeah, there is a complete science on how different everything is. The lugs on the early ones are narrower, and it goes on and on. One of the things I want to tell you about this Springer is, because it was originally set up from the factory with the big twin rockers, the studs, the holes that are drilled here, those are 1/2 inch. On a WLA, they'd be 7/16. So this Springer should only really be used for WLC because the holes are larger. In order to put like a WLA rocker on, you would have a little bit of slop right here. Like there'd be play in the leg. To give you an idea, so these, you can see the size of the axle, quite large, as opposed to WLA. And if I remember correctly, these are like a 5/8, 1/2 inch, 5/8, but they're a lot smaller because the brake on a WLA was integral to the hub, where on a WLC the hub was interchangeable with the rear, and it had the big twin brakes. So there's the Springer. It's in beautiful shape. You know, yeah, it's got some shelf wear, but it's in beautiful shape. So one other way to determine years on Springers is how the brake anchor is welded. So the brake anchor on 36, 37 was brazed on. It wasn't welded at all. Late 37 to 39, it had a tack weld. 39 to 42 it was welded just a little bit here. 43 to 45 is this. This is how this is welded. And then 46 to 57, ending with the Survey car in 57, it was welded all the way around. So what we have here is a new old stock Harley front fender, lipless front fender. And what you're gonna notice is just very, very simple fender, smooth. It doesn't have the side valances. So what they did in 44, 45, they designed this fender because they thought it would help stop mud from accumulating between the fender and the tire, which I guess it could, and it probably did. But the problem is, it took away a lot of the strength. So when you have the other fender, which has got the sides on it, those are the three-piece fender they call them, and it's a lot stronger. So what happens was, you know, if a serious amount of mud collected, it could distort the fender. You could actually bend it in areas because it's lost so much strength. These are pretty rare. Only made 1944, 45. Again, new old stock. There's one thing here that I am not sure if that's factory. There's a hole here, and it's really crudely kind of made. You know, it has like a burr on it. So I'm not sure what that's all about. You know, this is the first one I've ever seen, you know, up close myself. So I have to look and do a bit of research and see if that hole is correct or not. But what you're going to see here, see how the fender, the bosses for the fender mounts are. Well, that ties in directly with the fender front springer, because these slide right in to underneath the springer onto the fender mounts. So it centers it, holds it in position. So, you know, nice that Harley did that, because it kept it, you know, very secure. Like when you pull them together, they're one. You know, what's neat too, you look at the rivets, you know, nice small rivets, but the fronts, you know, they're flat. So when you're, you know, serious guys about restoring, will look at the details like that. That is huge. How the rivets look, how they're fit, the width of the braces, everything. Like when you're looking at aftermarket fenders, you know, they do a pretty decent job with the fender themselves, but they tend to always make the rivets really poorly. When a little bit more effort and you could replicate the fenders so much better. You know, a lot of times you'll see aftermarket fenders, and these rivets are like twice the size, flatter, wider, just horrible. I just don't understand why they go to so much effort, but then they kind of cheap out on the last little bit. Again, on this fender, you're gonna see there's a lot of scratches and stuff. Was it ever mounted on something? Could have been, but we're gonna mount it. Now, we're gonna have a little bit of a difficulty here, because if I remember correctly, this was WLA only, and the rockers on the Springer I have is WLC. So the width is gonna be a little bit wider on the mounting this, because again, on the Springer, WLC Springer, the rockers on the outside of the legs. A WLA, the rockers are on the inside. So there's a bit more space. There's less space between here and here on a WLA as opposed to a WLC. So what we got here is we got a bunch of the parts that we're going to be using for this project. You know, I've got NOS front fender light that mounts onto this fender. We got the side blackout light, and it goes on and on and on. All new old stock. There's some more parts, but that's mostly internal stuff. Got some other parts here that we'll be using. including new old stock air cleaner 43. That is the motor that we'll be pulling out of this project in the future. And here's the handlebars that I put on here. This was another project that came with that same pile I got of the new old stock parts. So I'm gonna have to really look closely at the front crash bar and the rear stand. Those also might be new old stock. It's hard to remember everything, you know, which was and is new old stock and which isn't, but we're gonna do our best. So we're gonna be pulling off a few more parts off this bike, a few parts off of this one, and then I'll have to replace it with you know, a different motor or etc. I've also got little, you know, collections of new old stock parts lying here and there and everywhere that we'll have to pull pieces out. There's also a little bit of new old stock parts here. This is all brand new from an old Harley shop that I bought out years ago. Not a lot of stuff, you know, pre-50, but there is a few, so we'll have to, you know, kind of go through this stuff and see what else we can find as far as hardware. And, you know, it's all new, old Harley parts. That's what we're going with. And finally, one more area that we got some parts. This is all new old stock Harley. This is the era that we'll be using it from. This is all, you know, pre-60, you know, late 20s to 60s. And this stuff is all 60s to early 80s. But this is the parts that we'll look at. Who knows what's in there, and see what we can come up with. So I know this is the most terribly exciting stuff, but it is extremely rare. This is just something I want to do, you know, assemble what I have of new old stock is mind-blowing to me. I never thought I'd have anywhere near this amount of Harleys projects and then new old stock parts like that. This is a little bit surreal. So one of the things I wanted to say too is I am not aware of any complete new old stock, never run Harleys remaining. If there is, if you know of any, put it in the comments. I'd love to find out and look at pictures and see what it looks like. It's gonna be neat. This is gonna be a neat process. Now, remember, these parts are 80 years old. They got shelf wear. You know, they're a little bit more beat up because of just, you know, bouncing around for 80 years. And we're going to slowly assemble this thing and see what we got. It's going to be cool. I'm excited. Like, I mean, I just never thought I'd ever have this opportunity. Never mind that it's my stuff. It's pretty neat. Pretty neat. And if the inner parts nerd in you finds it interesting, follow along. Let's get on it. On the next episode, we're going to assemble some of this stuff. I got to pull the motor out like I just showed you. I got to pull some parts off, clean it, make sure it looks as, you know, as good as I can, and then see what we got. See those leg shields? New old stock also. Got the mounts too. So it's going to be cool. I'm excited. Hey, this is Save the Rest. This is Keith. This is what we do. This is who we are. Have a great day.